Well, thanks very much, Maddie, for that introduction. And I just want to first off say thank you to the organizers of this webinar. I know I've learned a lot of good information so far, wrote a lot of good notes, and I want to commend all those folks that are joining as attendees today. I trust it has been some good information for you. And so while we've been focusing, I guess, largely so far on polycropping and the benefits in terms of that it can be, a good nutritional source of feed and other aspects. My presentation will shift the focus slightly, looking at some of the potential environmental benefits of incorporating forage cover crops blends within a farming system. So with that as the applied research lead at the Glacier Farm Media Discovery Farm, I'm happy to be here for this presentation. And we'll be focusing again on our water management project that we will be initiating this spring at the Discovery Farm. And the research, one of the research questions we're interested in is, can cover crops, forage mixtures be used to protect water quality as a part of a water management system? So with that, I just want to provide a little bit of context on what the Discovery Farm is. The Discovery Farm is the name of the entire property located west of Langham, Saskatchewan. We have the full section of land out there. And while you may not be familiar with the name Discovery Farm, I trust many of you are familiar with the site, as it is the home to Ag in Motion, which is Western Canada's premier outdoor farm show. And it was at the 2019 Ag in Motion show that we launched this brand of the Discovery Farm. And one of the purposes of that was to really highlight our goals for the site beyond those 3 days in the middle of July when the show takes place. And so one of the important components of that is our applied research program that we conduct over 350 acres at the site every year. And within this program, there's a range of different research and demonstration type projects really across the entire continuum. Everything from small plot replicated research for the purpose of, product discovery, development, and registration, all the way up to field scale demonstration projects using commercially available equipment and everything in between. So I'll briefly just highlight a few of those projects. The first is the Field of Excellence program. This is a really important program where we're bringing together industry partners from across the entire supply chain. So that includes crop input companies, equipment companies, technology companies, and really we're coming together on a project. Everyone's bringing their niche, and we're working on a project with a single cohesive objective. And we're doing this project really at the field scale using commercially available equipment. And our hope really is that to try to stimulate meaningful conversations around different agronomic practices and technologies. And really our hope is that it might inspire any farmers that are interested in what we're seeing to take that back to their own operation and try it out on their own farm for a little bit of further validation. The second category is private sector funded projects. So the example is we're working with Yara Fertilizer and with their Yara Incubator Farm on our site. So this is a project, really they have their exclusive space on the Discovery Farm, but our resources are designing and implementing those projects and protocols and really working as a third-party contract research group. And then the final category is publicly funded research projects like the water management project, which I'll be focusing on in today's presentation. We're fortunate in working with our partners that our site is really equipped with what we call a state-of-the-art digital farming infrastructure. And what that practically means is that we have a number of data collection hardware and sensors installed within the field. And we also work with other remote sensing techniques like satellite imagery and others. And some of this hardware includes soil moisture probes, weather stations, cameras that track the growth of the crop over the entire growing season and others. And really collectively, this just helps us to collect data and make informed management decisions in season, as well at the end of the season when we're doing our analysis and interpretation on the data we're seeing in our observations. It really just helps us to understand a little bit better what's going on. And the final piece I'd like to make clear is that we are very passionate for knowledge transfer and extension. With many of the projects that we do, our main goal is to get this information out to farmers and the industry, and almost as importantly, to hear back from the industry feedback on the types of projects that we're doing. We are very much open to hearing ideas, and indeed we want to be engaging with the industry just to ensure that the types of projects that we are doing are actually answering relevant questions and resonating. So at the end of the presentation, I'll share my contact information, and I do encourage and hope that some folks would feel they can reach out if they have any feedback or comments or ideas for future projects. So with that said, I'll now go into the water management project. And at the outset, I do want to acknowledge that we did receive funding from this project from the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency, the Saskatchewan Soil Conservation Association, and the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association. And along with myself in the scientific team, we're also partnering with Dr. Jeff Shano from the University of Saskatchewan and Dr. Jane Elliott from the Global Institute of Water Security. So really, I think it brings a nice, diverse research team along to this project. By way of introduction, I trust it's not a surprise to you that there is an interest in using surface drainage to manage water and agricultural landscapes for a variety of both economic and logistical reasons. That said, we do know that agricultural runoff water can be a source of nutrients, including nitrogen and phosphorus, with the resulting potential impacts on the environment. And so while the amounts of the nutrients that export the landscape are highly dependent on the unique situation, it is certainly something that we should be mindful as stewards of our land. When it comes to thinking about the total load of nutrients that would leave a site in the runoff water, really there's two factors at play. The first, of course, is the volume of water that leaves the site, and secondly, the concentration of the nutrient within that water. So in the project I'll be introducing, we're going to be looking at both aspects of that. Of course, when we conduct surface drainage on a landscape, we're going to be impacting the amount of water that's released in the runoff water, but we're also looking at the impact that management practices might have on reducing that nutrient concentration in the runoff water and hopefully counteract some of the impacts from releasing that water in the landscape. So ultimately, our research question is, how does a properly designed water management plan work together with agricultural management practices to protect water quality? There's two components of this project. The first is the design and construction of a wetland consolidation component, and this is what we did working very closely with the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency, and we initiated this over the summer and fall of 2020. And the second component is a subsequent 2-year field study where we're going to be evaluating various agricultural management practices in terms of their ability to protect that water quality. So when you think of doing a wetland consolidation project, of course, you need to understand the site, and not surprisingly, an important component of that site is there needs to be wetlands and low-lying depressional areas within the site that are filled with water. So this slide is just to provide a little bit of context on the site. So you're looking at a satellite image of the Discovery Farm property, and the polygon that's overlaid on top of that image really represents the project area that we'll be looking at. So it totals 40 acres in size, and the various color scheme you're looking at is the elevation within this area. So you can see that clearly there's a range in elevation from the low-lying red areas and yellow color all the way up to the blue and purple color. So another way of representing that elevation is we took that and we modeled topography and the water runs in the site, working with CropPro Consulting as one of our industry partners. And so you can clearly see from this figure here that there is certainly some, undulating topography in the site, and a number of these low-lying areas that are periodically flooded with water throughout the growing season. Some would be maybe just flooded at the time of seeding. Some you would be able to seed right through them, but then when you get large rain events, they become flooded throughout the year, and everything in between. So this is the location that we are targeting for this field study. This map here shows the ultimate research design for the project. So we took that information that we had, again, working very closely with the Water Security Agency and their technicians. We did very intense survey of the site using RTK GPS to collect high resolution elevation data. And from that, we designed this research plan. So what you're looking at here is the red polygons. There's 8 of these within the field site. And really, you can think of these as independent mini watersheds within the space. So because of the topography of the area, each of these operates as its own watershed. The waters would be contained within the separate area. So we can use these as our distinct experimental units, which will be putting our management practices on top of them. So each one of these 8 polygons, we're essentially farming them with separate management practices. And then the teal lines within the space represent the surface drainage channels that were cut. So you can see there's a cut out of each of the basins. And at that point, we are able to install a flume and can sample that water exiting the site to understand the impacts on water quality. This image here shows the machine that we used this fall to do the actual surface channels. So this is a bulldozer type unit. We partnered with a company called V-Wing, and the tractor is of course equipped with RTK GPS as well, so it can make very high resolution cuts only as needed. And it's quite surprising that really there's a minimal soil disturbance actually involved with this machine, only moving, the amount of soil that's really needed just to get the water to flow. And largely we're following the natural topography in the field as best as possible. So now that we've done that wetland consolidation component, the second part, of course, is the field study. And this will be a 2-year field study beginning this spring. And as I mentioned before, if you add up all the area of those 8 polygons, really it represents an area about 40 acres in size. So what I want to highlight with that is you can consider this a true field scale type study. And so our hope is that the observations and the results we see are relevant to what would be seen again in a real field setting. Recognizing, of course, this is just one site location, but really our hope is that it'll create a model where we can design further projects to further validate this across other conditions and geographies in the province. This study had a total of 4 treatments, which were replicated twice, and we're going to randomize them within the 8 basins. And so now going over the treatments, and of course the most important one for this presentation is what we call, regenerative cover or forage cropping, polycropping, if you will. But ultimately what it is a mix of annual forage species, including legumes. And it's important that we're targeting that functional group of legumes. The reason being, and really the hypothesis for this treatment, is that by having legumes, of course, they're able to fix their own nitrogen. So the idea being that when we're seeding this mix, it will have a reduced nitrogen demand at the time of seeding compared to simply an annual crop. And so by making better use of that nitrogen that's fixed by the legumes, as well as the residual nitrogen at the site, our hope is that it'll have a positive impact on reducing the amount of nutrients lost in the runoff water. The second treatment is a fertility management treatment, and really what we're doing here is using variable rate fertilizer application at the time of seeding. The rationale for this treatment is again, understanding the soils that we're targeting in this site. Largely these are low-lying areas. They could be prone to salinity. They typically are high in residual nutrients, including nitrogen, phosphate, and sulfur due to marginal productivity over the years. So our idea is that we can dial back our application rates of fertilizer at seeding, and the crop can make use of the residual nutrients, thereby again preventing the amount lost in the runoff water. The third treatment is looking at the residue management. And this treatment was really inspired by my graduate studies work, where we found that crop residue left on the surface after harvest can be a substantial source of dissolved phosphate in the runoff water. And so our idea is, if we have a light incorporation event with such as a unit like a harrow type of equipment or very light tillage, we'll be able to incorporate that residue into the surface soils so that that phosphate is fixed in the soil instead of running off in the water. And then of course a control treatment for comparison purposes. In terms of the data that we're collecting from this project, after we did the construction activity this fall, we took baseline soil sampling within each of the basin areas so that we can understand, of course, our starting point. And then by sampling the soils annually after each harvest at each of those same sampling locations, we can understand whether or not there are any differences in terms of the soil properties, and especially within the surface soil layers, of course, and those layers that are most importantly going to be interacting with that runoff water. And the next aspect is, of course, the annual grain and biomass yield from these treatments, along with the amount of nutrients, the nutrient concentration in that grain and biomass. We're going to be installing flumes at each site so that we can collect that runoff water and analyze it for nutrient concentration, as well as water infiltration within the plots. And then there is also certainly the potential to expand the scope with additional treatments as we secure additional funding for this project. So, maybe something that is interesting to look at would be, of course, the quality of the feed that we're removing from this site. But ultimately, what we're really hoping for is to have a mass balance accounting of all the nutrients in the system. So if we know the nutrients that we are starting with at the site based on soil test results, we know what we are adding at the time of seeding, we know what's being removed from the site in terms of the harvested biomass and grain, we know what is leaving the site in the runoff water, then we can use that ultimately to understand full tracking of where the nutrients are within the system. In addition, we're using some data collection hardware and specifically soil moisture probes to understand some of the soil water dynamics in this site. So again, how is this runoff water interacting with the soil? And there's two, I guess, depths that we're specifically interested in. So the first, of course, is, within the, I guess, the surface soil layers, or really the rooting zone. So again, understanding the impact that the treatments might have on influencing, water infiltration in that crop rooting zone. And then secondly, deeper within the soil profile to understand what impact the water table might have on infiltration and consequently on runoff water. And so just to show, really a rationale for looking at this, I presented on the screen some data from the Discovery Farm project that we had, where we had soil moisture probes installed at a single location in the field, but in each of 3 soil management zones in the field. And these zones are really largely defined by the topography within the field, along with the underlying soil characteristics. And so just to go over these zones for context, so zone 1, these are largely, the upslope areas of the field. These are typically dry areas of the field, possibly sandy texture. Zone 5 is the sort of what you would consider the field averages of the site. So these are, mid-slope locations, and then the third category, zone 8, these are the sites that we are targeting in this water management study. These are largely low-lying depressional areas, periodically flooded with water. They could be saline. But in any case, so we're reporting the soil moisture values with a probe installed at each of these 3 zones and reporting moisture at depth from the soil surface down to 120 centimeter depth. But what I want to make clear is just to show the stark contrast in soil moisture based on the management zone. So in zone 1, this blue line, we can see it is largely dry conditions. I mean, would certainly be an impact on the crop growth, where our soil moisture content, would be an average, let's say 30%. Contrasting that with the gray line in the zone 8 zones, where even at a depth of about 30 to 50 centimeters, we're approaching that saturation point of the soils. So what this is telling me is that water table is that close to the soil surface, and we would expect that there'd be an impact on, infiltration, of course, and waters running off as well. So that's really an introduction on our water management project. Now I'm going to shift gears and just briefly highlight some of the other good work that the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association did with their infiltration demos this year. And I guess the caveat I want to present before I go into it is that I wasn't involved in the data collection on these projects, so I won't give a lot of commentary in terms of the results and what we're seeing, but I just wanted to highlight it in terms of the good work that they're doing. And I trust if folks have follow-up questions on that, they can certainly reach out to the folks at SSGA for more information. But this slide here just shows the 4 sites that we did, that these infiltration demos were done at this year. So they were at Watrous, Wapella, Minton, and Rhine. So a nice distribution, on the eastern part of the province. And this is the data that we saw at the site. So this is showing water infiltration rates in centimeters per hour by the treatments and at the 4 different sites. And so at each of the sites, they had 3 sampling locations within the cover crop field, where of course you would have a mix of species, compared to the control situation, which was, you would think of it as a monoculture crop. So what I want to show, and what is quite noticeable, of course, is the difference in infiltration rates from the control compared to the cover crop. And in 3 of the 4 sites, we saw quite a substantially higher infiltration rates in the cover crop compared to the control. So again, I'm not going to really give a lot of commentary on there just because I wasn't involved in the data collection or anything, but I think one of the reasons why you might expect that is from some of these photos we're seeing here. So in these cover cropping treatments, we're seeing very good productivity, and the image on the right of the screen showing the rooting system. And I would expect in this cover cropping, polycropping treatment, you're having different rooting architecture from a number of species compared to the monocrop control. And I suspect that's the reason largely for the difference in the infiltration rates across the sites. So that's to conclude the presentation. I just want to again offer the opportunity to connect with us. Please do. For those folks that are interested in hearing more about what we're doing at the Discovery Farm, feel free to check out our website, discoveryfarm.ca. We do have an annual research report, which we present all the results and findings from our projects. So you can find that on our website. And we do offer a number of field days at the Discovery Farm, and even in the midst of the challenging situation in 2019 with COVID, or 2020 with COVID and those sorts of things, we were able to carry on with a number of field days at our site, of course, respecting the regulations that were at play. So, smaller crowds and just showing the site. So that's definitely an opportunity, and we're carrying forward with that next year as well. And then I would encourage you to follow us on Twitter at Discovery Farm SK. And with that, here's my contact information. So again, I would definitely encourage anyone interested in reaching out and learning more, or just connecting with me, please feel free to do so. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this afternoon.
Awesome. Thank